Okay, here we go. This is a guy that is gonna show us how to make acoustic drums into electronic drums without a lot of big modifications. So this is gonna show you all the tools you need and the steps that you need to take to build your own. So here we go. The mesh is gonna be made with pet resistant screening. In this case it's called pet defense. Like that. It's strong enough to use only one layer and it'll bounce pretty good, I think. So I'm gonna make it and test it. Also gonna need some plastic tubing, just like that, to make the rim of the mesh head. Clear tape, double-sided, or doesn't have to be clear, but it has to be double-sided. And sanding block, small sanding block. It doesn't have to be a good quality, you're just gonna use the actual sponge of it, not the sanding part. So you're gonna cut it with a blade. In this case it's gonna be a box cutter. Any cheap box cutter will do. Just be careful not to cut yourself while cutting those pieces. Machine screws, you're gonna need quite a few, so just get a little box. Doesn't have to be any specific size, but about 1.5 inch long. All the necessary nuts and washers that you're gonna add to that, so that you can put them in place once you make your drum. Again, washers. And you're not gonna need 50, but you're gonna need at least 20 of them. So just get a box, might as well just have them for later other projects that you decide to build. So you're gonna need L brackets. You're not gonna need the screws from the L brackets because we're using the mechanic screws, or the machine screws, I mean. So the L brackets are not gonna be needed. Revolving punch or a leather punch, so you can punch holes in the mesh, is also gonna be used. Heat shrink is gonna be optional. It makes for a cleaner termination when you solder and connect your cables. You're definitely gonna need solder. I like to have the resin core or rosin core because it's already ready to go. Soldering iron or a soldering gun, whichever one you have, as long as you have one, you're gonna need one. Something to hold your soldering iron, just like this base. Like you can find it for like $7 at the electronics store. That way you don't burn your floor or your table. Extra red cable and extra black cable, just the smallest cable. This is just gonna be used to add length to the cables on the piezo sensors. You're gonna need phono jacks or phone jacks. This says mono, I know it says mono, but it's gonna be a stereo one. You're gonna need a stereo 1/4 phone jack, so just make sure it's a stereo. Unless you decide to just make a single zone drum, then this is gonna be needed. Table vise like this is highly recommended. It'll help you unless you have an extra hand. This will be your extra hand. Cable stripper is an optional item. I use it because it just makes stripping cables a lot easier than trying to do it with a knife, and it's cheap. Aluminum bars, you're gonna use those to make the bars that are gonna go in the middle of the drums, holding your sensor. So just get as many as you need to complete your drums. A file to file those aluminum bars. Once you cut them, you're gonna have some sharp edges, so you're gonna file them off so they're not sharp and they're better terminated. Some rusty, in my case, a rusty ass metal saw to cut those aluminum bars. Drill, obviously to make the holes for the screws and all of that. And I know there's a lot of tools. You're gonna need a measuring tape or something to measure your bar, so you can measure once or measure twice and cut once, like the old saying does. A multimeter. You don't need to have a really super fancy multimeter. Any $10 multimeter would do. You can find them in the automotive section on the stores. If you happen to have a good one like this, better. Drum key. What kind of drummer doesn't have a drum key, right? So you have to have a drum key, obviously, to remove the heads from the drums. TS cable or tip and sleeve cable if you're gonna make a single sound drum, or a TRS cable like this one if you're gonna make a double sound drum, tip, ring, and sleeve. That's for 2 zones, the rim and the head. This is a trigger for the bass drum that I happen to have, so I'm not making that one. But you can still make it triggers for your bass drum using the same bar method that I'm gonna use for this any other drums if you don't have one like this. It's a nice one to have though. Next thing is gonna be Y connectors that are like mono female to stereo male. If you decide to make a two cable sensor, like for a cymbal or stuff like that, you can make separate cables. There's plenty of options that you can go about building your stuff. This is a piezo sensor part. You can find a Radio Shack, or you can find them on the internet anywhere. Amazon has them for like $20 for like 20. A Sharpie marker that is going to be used to obviously mark the mesh that you're going to cut. It's this color because the mesh is black, so black marker you won't see it. Liquid tape is going to be used to, when you finish soldering your cable connections, you can put that instead of heat shrink. I'm going to try it, see how it goes. And okay, here we go. The tubing, you're going to tape one end of the tubing, and then you're going to run it around the rim, the inside rim of the drum, and then you're going to make it match to the other end and cut it to length so it fits. Make sure you have the tape around the rim so it doesn't get smaller than it needs to be. Then you're going to mark your mesh with the outside of the rim, the outside, not the inside, so you have enough mesh to fit your drum. Next thing you're going to do, you're going to complete the circles on the mesh like this, so you will have a full circle. Then you're going to draw little dots, which is where you're going to make your holes, and you can separate them by 1 inch. That way you have a semi-equidistant distance, so then you can cut your mesh, and you leave about an inch and a half past the dots, so you have extra room. And you're going to start making those holes with your leather punch or whatever instrument you're going to use to make the holes. Just don't make them too big, just make them big enough for that tubing to go through. Here we go, we have the holes made. I had to enlarge mine because the leather punch wasn't big enough, so I ended up using a screwdriver to make them bigger. Then you run the tubing through it like so, and you're going to tape the end. Once the 2 ends of the tubing meet, you're going to tape them up so that it doesn't come off. And at that point you have your mesh head. I know it doesn't look like much right now, but it's a start. You're going to look for one of the screws that hold the hardware in your drum. In my case, my drum only has screws in the middle, but other drums have screws on the top and the bottom, sometimes even 4. So you look for the one that is closest to the top, which is where you're going to mount your L brackets. So since I have only one in the middle, I have to mount mine, the bottom of the L bracket, on the screw so they can go as high as possible in the drum. And then you mount another L bracket on the opposite side, just like that. Then you're gonna measure the distance between the 2 L brackets, and you're gonna cut your aluminum bar to match the distance on the L brackets, like so. And then with a different marker, in this case it can be a black marker or whatever, you're gonna mark the holes at the bottom of the L brackets, and you're gonna drill them. Then once you drill them, you're gonna put your screws. That's why I use the screw, to match the size of the holes in the aluminum bar with the size of the screw, just slightly bigger, so the screws can slide easily. Now I make my separators between the bars and the L brackets out of a CD sponge. This comes on the CD spindles, because the rubber washes that I found were too stiff, and the purpose of this is to isolate the bar from the rest of the drum, so the sensor doesn't trigger, just like that. I know they're ghetto, but I just left them that color so that they're easier to see on the pictures. Just like that, you put washer, screw, sponge, bar, sponge, washer, and nut at the bottom so you can hold it just like that. And at the end, if you don't like the way they look, you can paint in black or whatever. It doesn't really matter because you're not really going to see them that much once you put the drum together. And that's how you punch the little holes in them with the leather punch. Of course, you can do it any way you want, as long as you get something that isolates the bar. Just a different picture there. As you can see, there's a hole in the middle of the bar. You measure the bar to see where the middle is, make a little hole. Again, the same size of the screw, but this one is going to be the one that is going to be holding the sensor, or the piezo sensor, whatever you want to call it. You're going to use an extra piece of that tubing just to raise the screw so it doesn't bottom out. Make it about 3/4 of the length of the screw. This doesn't have to be insulated because the bar itself is already insulated, so just enough so you can put it through the bar and screw it in with 2 nuts. I use 2 nuts, so one nut holds the other and it doesn't come off with vibration. These are my cat's can lids. These are going to be used to make a base for that sensor, which is going to be glued to the top of the screw. You can use hot glue, or you can use the double-sided tape, or you can use crazy glue, or whatever method you want to put those things. That's the part number of the sensor, in case anybody missed it. Or you can get a lot of them on eBay or Amazon. So you trace that from the sensor cap, and then you cut it with the super awesome scissors that I happen to have. They're Kevlar scissors, and they cut through anything. So you cut the little disc. Be careful not to cut yourself because that stuff is really sharp. Glue the disc or super glue or double-sided tape, whatever, on top of the screw that you mounted in the middle of the bar. And then you're going to put double-sided tape on top of that, but don't peel the top portion of the double-sided tape just yet, because we still have to actually build the sensor. So that's what the bar is going to look like. And now we're going to build the 2 piezo sensor assembly to put it there. You have to pry open the piezo sensor, or piezo. Some people say piezo, some people say piezo. I say both. So let's go with sensor. That way nobody gets offended. So you're gonna break the little ears or the little tabs. Break them off with pliers and pry it open really carefully, making sure you don't damage the actual sensor or the cables. And there's a hole on the other side of that, so you can poke through the hole and push the little sensor out carefully. And you should end up with just a little disc with the 2 cables. And as you can see, the cables are really short, so that's why we are going to cut 2 lengths of red cables and 2 lengths of black cables. You can see that's where you put the clear tape on top of that sensor, but don't peel the top of it yet. Like I said earlier, it's not ready for the sensor yet, so just leave it like that for now. Anyway, next thing is gonna be the sensor comes with strip cable, but as you can see, the stripping is really short, so you're gonna strip it to about double the length. That should give you enough of cable to wrap it around the extra lengths that you just cut. Oh, those extra lengths should be like that, about as long as the drum itself. So if the drum is 12 inches, just cut 12 inches of extra cable. And like I said, we're going to cut 2 reds and 2 blacks because we're going to make a double zone drum. Again, if you don't want to make a double zone drum, then just cut 1 black and 1 red. Now we're going to use our trusty table vise so we can hold these cables while we put them together, so we can hold them, so we can solder them. Unless you have somebody extra with you, then that's going to be your third hand. It comes in handy. So hold them up, tie them together, put a little bit of solder. If you don't know how to solder, there's plenty of tutorials on YouTube that show you how to do that. After you solder is cool, you can put that liquid tape, as you can see in the picture, You can put a little bit or just a little bit, let it dry, or you can use the heat shrink. But obviously you have to slide the heat shrink first to the cable and then solder and then put the heat shrink in place. This is the actual wiring, how it goes. It shows you the head piezo and the rim piezo. You can see the head piezo goes in the tip and the rim piezo goes in the ring, and then the black leads of both go into the sleeve. So that's how you would solder your connections. You can pause this so you can take notes on that one or whatever. That's a really simple graphic. On the actual connector it looks different, so you plug in cable so you can see what touches this tip. Like on the top is the tip, the middle is the ring, and the larger part is the sleeve. So just follow the things that touch the different parts of the connector, and that's where you put your cables. That should be really self-explanatory. There's a it's a different view. It shows you what it looks like. Again, you're gonna put this on your table vise so you can hold it while you solder, because you don't want it moving around. Plus, if somebody else was to hold it, that thing gets kind of hot when you heat up the solder to solder your cables. So if somebody's holding it, they're gonna get burned. So you may want to have something holding it, or if somebody else is gonna be holding it, then ask them to hold it with pliers or something carefully. See, as you can see, you have all your cables already put in place and soldered. And once everything is in place, actually before you even solder, you can put the cables before you solder them to the connector, not before you solder them to the sensor, because they go from the sensor to the connector. Before you solder them to the connector, you can put them all in place and then plug them into your module and test them to see if everything works correctly. And if not, then figure out what was wrong before you commit to soldering. You can always undo soldering, but it's easier if you get it right the first time and then you solder. As you can see, I made a little hole in my drum to put the connector, and it's on a discrete place close to where the mount goes. If you have really expensive drums, I don't recommend this method. You can put your connector mounted to the little bar and then just go from the bottom of the drum. But you would have to remove the bottom head, and it's just, I don't know. To me, since those drums are not super expensive, I just added that sensor and left the acoustic bottom head, and the top head is mesh. Since I realized that leaving the bottom head actually still retains a little qualities of the acoustic. That's another picture of the setup. As you can see, the trigger sensor, the rim sensor is attached to the drum wall, and the other one is obviously right on the middle of the bar. So you glue it to the double-sided tape, cable side down, so the actual sensor is just facing the top. Then you put double-sided tape on a little square of sponge, just like that, little square of that sanding block, just enough to go about touching the head, maybe a little past the head, but not much. And that's what it's gonna look like. Like I was saying, since I left the bottom head, I noticed that when you hit the mesh head, you can still hear some resonance, even though it's a mesh head. So I use one of these, which is a silencer for drums. It's like a kind of like a mouse pad material, and it's actually cut to fit the drum. So I just put it inside, and it's resting on the bottom head, so I have no resonance whatsoever. And there's no light coming through because the bottom heads were clear, so you could see kind of like the internals of the drum. So now that I put that, there's no light coming through. I'm just gonna do another part here that is gonna show you the drum in action. I'm using Steven Slade drums, version 3. I don't have 4 yet because it came out just recently and I don't have the money to get it. So as soon as I get that money, I will probably get it. I highly recommend it. If you haven't heard of it, check it out, stevensladedrums.com.